The trunk had belonged to Agnes for 30 years, and Vesa had been putting off opening it since the funeral. It sat in the corner of the cottage's single bedroom, dark wood worn smooth at the corners, the iron latch stiff from disuse. Vesa had walked past it every morning for a month, told herself she'd get to it later, and then found something else to do. There was always something else to do. The herbs needed sorting. The roof had a gap near the eastern beam that let cold air in at night. The village had not stopped needing things simply because Agnes was gone. But the trunk had waited long enough. Vesa knelt on the stone floor and worked the latch open. Inside, folded linens that smelled of lavender and thyme, a bundle of dried chamomile, 2 good candles she hadn't known her mother kept, a leather satchel she'd seen Agnes carry to the capital every year since Vesa could remember, worn at the strap, the buckle replaced twice. She set each thing aside carefully. At the bottom, beneath the linens, the wood felt wrong. She pressed her palm flat and found the seam, a thin line cut into the base of the trunk, barely wide enough to fit a fingernail. She worked it loose. The compartment underneath held 3 things: a small bundle of letters tied with cord, a folded document with a wax seal she didn't recognize, and a journal bound in dark leather with Agnes's initials pressed into the cover. Vesa sat back on her heels. She untied the letters first. They were not love letters. They were correspondence between Agnes and someone at the court of Valdemir, unsigned on the receiving end, but stamped with a seal that matched the document. Formal language, careful wording. Her mother's responses, written in the tight, controlled hand Vesa knew well, answered questions about her health, her practice, her domestic situation. The last letter in the bundle was dated 8 months ago and asked, pointedly, whether Agnes intended to continue withholding certain information from the king's court indefinitely. Her mother had not written back. Vesa opened the journal. The earliest entries were from before she was born. Agnes writing about her work, her travels, the packs she moved between as a traveling herbalist. She had not belonged to any single pack for most of her adult life. That much Vesa had always known. What she had not known was that for 20 consecutive years, Agnes had registered herself in the capital as an independent practitioner and attended the Alpha King's annual tribute ceremony. Not as a petitioner, as someone with a reason to be present that she never put into words. Vesa turned pages. The entries became sparse as she read forward. Years compressed into single paragraphs. What had been written with care became guarded, abbreviated, as if Agnes had started to distrust even her own private record. Then she reached the last entry. 5 weeks ago. Agnes's handwriting was shakier than the earlier pages. Not from age, because Agnes had been barely past 50, but from something that looked like urgency pressed into every stroke. I have waited too long. Whatever I feared when she was a child, she is not a child now. I am going to Valdemir. Not for the ceremony, outside of it, without announcement. I will ask to see the king directly. If Crispin intercepts me again, I will find another way. She deserves to know why I kept her away. He deserves to know she exists. I should have done this years ago. That was all. The page after it was blank. Agnes had left for Valdemir 5 weeks ago, been turned away or redirected or something the journal didn't record. She had come home a week later and taken to bed with what she'd called a chest sickness. 2 weeks after that, she was gone. Vesa sat on the stone floor with the journal in her lap and did not move for a long time. Outside, the village went about its mourning. The blacksmith's hammer, the geese near the pond, a child shouting 2 cottages over. The world had not rearranged itself to mark the fact that everything she thought she knew about her mother had just inverted. Agnes had kept her away from the capital deliberately for 20 years, and then, 5 weeks before she died, had tried to correct it. The royal summons arrived 3 days later. It came with a king's courier, which meant it came with a horse, 2 guards, and the absolute certainty that the recipient would comply. The courier read from a scroll without making eye contact. All eligible women of the territory were required to present themselves at the capital within 14 days for the annual tribute ceremony. Presence was not optional. Absence without documented cause was a violation of pack law. Vesa took the scroll. What counts as documented cause? The courier looked at her for the first time. Death. My mother died a month ago. That exempts the deceased, he said, not the living. He left the scroll on the table and rode away. Vesa packed that afternoon. She didn't own silk or gold. She owned 2 good dresses, her drawing materials, her herbalist kit inherited from Agnes, and the contents of the hidden compartment in the trunk. She packed the journal, the letters, and the document with the unrecognized seal. She also packed the drawing. It had been tucked inside a botany reference on Agnes's shelf, a book Vesa had pulled down 100 times over the years to check herb identification, never paging all the way through to where the drawing had been placed near the back, between 2 pages on root systems. A piece of paper aged to soft yellow, folded twice, the charcoal faded but intact. She had made that drawing when she was 5 years old. She remembered the market, the noise, the press of bodies, the moment she'd looked up and her mother was simply not there. She'd stood in the middle of a crowd that moved around her without stopping, unable to make herself walk in any direction because every direction looked the same and none of them were Agnes. A boy had crouched down beside her. Dark hair, a child's round face, eyes a warm amber even then. He hadn't asked what was wrong. He'd waited while she cried, and when she started to slow down, he'd handed her a piece of paper. A wolf on a hill, looking at the moon. He'd said something about the moon. She'd been too young to hold on to the exact words, but the feeling of them had stayed. That looking at something steady helped when everything else was moving. She'd drawn him back. The only thing she could think to draw. The back of a boy sitting on a rock, looking at a horizon she couldn't see. They'd traded papers. Then someone found her and pulled her back into the crowd, and that was that. She'd never seen him again. She had kept the drawing because it felt wrong to discard something someone had given her during the worst 20 minutes of her childhood. Agnes had kept her drawing, the one she'd given the boy, inside this book. Vesa turned that over in her mind for the full 3 days of the journey to Waldmeer. Agnes had somehow retrieved it, or found it, or the boy had left it somewhere, and Agnes had come across it later. There were explanations. She didn't have enough information to know which one was true. She arrived at the capital on the 4th morning, road-tired and underslept, with everything she owned in a single bag. The tribute hall was larger than any room she had ever stood in. Stone arches overhead, dark marble underfoot, worn smooth by decades of the same ceremony. Torches ran the length of both walls. At the far end, elevated on 2 steps, the throne sat empty, which meant the king had not yet entered, which meant she was not late, which was the one thing she'd managed correctly so far. The hall was already full. Women in silks and furs stood in careful lines, attendants arrayed behind them. A few spoke quietly. Most did not. Vesa joined the back of the line and kept her eyes forward. She was aware of the assessments, the quick glances at her dress, her bag, her hands. She had scrubbed the charcoal from her fingers 3 times on the road and still had a shadow of it along the side of her right palm. A woman 2 places ahead turned and looked with the particular kind of curiosity that was not curiosity at all. Vesa didn't respond to it. The doors at the end of the hall opened. The reaction moved through the room before the man was fully visible, a collective tightening, every wolf in the hall responding to the specific quality of authority walking through those doors. Vesa felt it too, that animal alertness, the sudden sharpening of every sense at once. But something else came with it that she had no category for. Her wolf stirred, not with submission, more like recognition, the particular attention that comes when something familiar appears somewhere it shouldn't be. She didn't understand it. She filed it. The Alpha King crossed to the throne without looking at anyone. He sat, dark hair to his jaw, a close beard, amber eyes that moved over the hall once, methodically, and then settled forward. No decoration, no ornamentation beyond the quality of the clothes themselves. He didn't need anything to announce what he was. The room had already arranged itself around him before he'd taken his seat. The line moved. Women approached, presented their offerings, were received. Silk, gold, a carved chest she couldn't see inside. Fine horses described by attendants while the women stood behind them, arranged like the final flourish of an argument. The king accepted everything with the same expression, not dismissive, but untouched. He said few words. His beta handled the logistics. Vesa got closer. The woman directly ahead presented a set of silver instruments, each wrapped in velvet. Medical tools, her attendant explained, forged by the finest craftsmen in the Eastern Territory. The king looked at them, nodded. The woman was directed left and disappeared into a receiving room. Next. Vesa stepped forward. She had no attendant, no chest, no velvet, no rehearsed presentation. She walked to the center of the floor alone, stopped at the appropriate distance, and held out the piece of paper. The silence that followed had weight. The beta moved first, to intercept, to manage the apparently confused woman who had presented herself with a scrap of old parchment. But the king raised one hand without looking at him, and the beta stopped. Something had shifted in the king's bearing. It had not happened when she held out the paper. It had happened before that, in the seconds after she stepped into the center of the floor. His jaw had tightened. His focus had moved to her with a quality entirely unlike the attention he'd given everyone before her. Not assessment. Something more immediate than that. He stood, 2 steps down from the throne. He crossed to her and stopped close enough that she had to keep her chin level to hold his gaze. She kept it level. He took the paper, unfolded it slowly. The torches were the only sound in the hall. Whatever she'd expected from his face, curiosity, confusion, the polite blankness of a king receiving something worthless, none of it came. His expression did something complicated and then tried to contain it, and he was not entirely successful. She felt it before she understood what she was feeling. A pressure at the edge of her senses, low and insistent, like a sound her ears couldn't quite locate. Her wolf was awake and attentive in a way that had nothing to do with the authority in the room. This was something else, something directed. His wolf was responding to her. She understood it the way she understood heat before contact, not thought, just the body knowing before the mind catches up. "Where did you get this?" he said. Not a question. "A boy gave it to me," Vesa said. "At a market on the North Road. I was 5 years old. I kept it." He looked at her. The full weight of it, unhurried. "Your name?" "Vesa. Of Fernholt." He held the drawing for another moment. Then he turned toward his beta. "Prepare the East Wing rooms." His voice carried the length of the hall without effort. "For Lady Vesa." The murmur that moved through the hall behind her was not quiet. She stood in the center of the marble floor with every eye in the room fixed on her back and watched the Alpha King return to his throne. He folded the drawing with the care given to things worth keeping and placed it inside his coat. He had not let go of it once. The East Wing rooms were larger than the entire ground floor of the cottage in Fernholt. Vesa stood in the center of the main room the first morning and did a slow count. 2 windows, both south-facing, a writing table, a wardrobe that could have held everything she owned 6 times over, a fireplace already lit, and a bed with 4 posts and curtains she didn't know what to do with. A woman appeared in the doorway before she'd finished the count. A servant, young, with an expression of professional neutrality that wavered slightly when she took in Vesa's single bag. "Lady Vesa," she said, "I'm to see to your needs. Do you require anything brought up?" "What's your name?" The woman blinked. "Pell." Then, catching herself, "Forgive me, my lady. I'll go by whatever you prefer." "Pell works." Vesa set her bag on the table. "What I need is to understand how the day runs here. Meals, movement, what I'm permitted, and what I'm not." Pell told her. It took about 10 minutes. The summary was, public areas of the palace, the inner gardens, the great hall during set hours. The library required a written request. The archive required explicit authorization from someone of title. Meals were served in the main hall, but could be sent up. No council sessions, no military briefings, no closed audience without direct invitation. "And what's my title?" Vesa asked. A pause. The king said, "Lady. That's a courtesy, not a title." "Yes, my lady." Vesa let it go. The first days were a study in how many ways a person could be evaluated without being spoken to directly. She walked the public corridors and felt the assessments, not hostile outright, but measuring. People who had spent years in that palace knew how to look at someone without appearing to look. She had a room in the East Wing. The king had given her the room. That made her someone to be understood before being treated. Some tried the direct approach. A lord she didn't know stopped her in the corridor near the Great Hall on the second day and asked, with elaborate courtesy, what her connection to the king was. "I presented a tribute," Vesa said. "Ah." He smiled in a way that communicated nothing useful. "And what sort of tribute does a woman from Fernholt bring?" "A drawing." His smile didn't change, but something behind it did. He excused himself, and she watched him go and filed that away. Lord Crispin she identified on the third day. She hadn't known to look for him. He was simply the man who appeared at every peripheral edge of the rooms she moved through without ever being in the foreground. She noticed him first in the garden, at a distance, not walking, but standing with the stillness of someone who had chosen his position rather than arrived at it by chance. The second time was in the corridor outside the archive, speaking to a clerk in a voice too low to carry. The third was at the evening gathering in the Great Hall, where he sat 3 seats from the king's right and said almost nothing the entire meal. He was not watching her the way the others watched her. The others were curious, or dismissive, or calculating in the way of people deciding whether something was relevant to their interests. Crispin was assessing something specific. She didn't know what yet. Bastian found her in the garden on the 5th day. She knew before she turned. Something in the quality of the air changed when he came within a certain distance, a sharpening, immediate and specific that had nothing to do with hearing his approach. She had spent 5 days learning how close was close enough for it to register. It was not subtle. It was also not something she had a name for that felt accurate. She turned and found him a few feet away, not quite stopped, as if he'd walked toward her with intention, and then reconsidered how to frame the purpose of it. "You didn't come to the evening gathering," he said. "I wasn't invited. The hall is open. Open to guests with a function. I don't have one." He was quiet for a moment. Something in the set of his mouth suggested he understood this was a problem he'd created by not addressing it at the start. "Come to the gathering tomorrow," he said. "You have a function. You're here because I asked you to be. That's not a function. For this court," he said, "it is." She looked at him. He held it without difficulty, a man accustomed to being looked at. What she hadn't expected was the steadiness behind it. No performance, simply present in the way that very few people manage to be. "You still have it," she said. "The drawing." "I do. I'd like to show you something." He nodded once. They walked to his study in a silence that didn't require filling. The study sat at the top of the tower's east stairs, a room that saw regular use, maps on the walls with markings in different inks, a table with 2 chairs, shelves where the books showed wear at the spines. She had expected something staged for visitors. This was where someone worked. Bastian opened the second drawer of the table and took out the drawing. He placed it on the table with the same care she had watched him use in the hall. She took her drawing from the pocket she'd kept it in since arriving, unfolded it, and placed it next to his. The room was very still. She had assembled the images in her head during the journey and thought she'd understood what she would see. She hadn't. His drawing, a wolf on a hill, facing left, the moon in the upper right. Her drawing, a boy on a rock, back turned, facing left. The sight lines matched. The wolf and the boy were looking in exactly the same direction. 2 children who had never compared their work had drawn the same direction of looking. She heard his breathing change. "I didn't notice until I was older," she said. "I'd look at it and think it was a boy on a rock. I didn't have the other half." Bastian didn't speak for a long moment. He was looking at the 2 papers with an expression she had no interest in naming, because naming it would require pretending she understood what it cost him to let it show. "I kept mine in a book," he said finally. For 18 years I moved it from one shelf to another. When I became king, I put it in this drawer. I had no reason for any of it." "Neither did I." He looked at her then. Whatever the bond was doing at this proximity, it was not quiet. She was aware of every small thing, the distance between them, the particular quality of attention he was giving her that was not the same attention he'd given the papers. Her wolf had been fully awake since she walked into this tower. She picked up both drawings and held them out to him. "You should have both," she said. He took them, and she watched him place them in the drawer, side by side, before he closed it. He came to the garden twice more that week. Neither visit had a stated purpose. The second time, he brought nothing, said little, and stayed longer than the first. She was finishing a section of wall she'd been sketching when he arrived, and she completed it before stopping, because stopping would have been an acknowledgement she wasn't ready to make. He watched her work. He didn't comment on it. She asked him, when she set down the charcoal, what he was doing outside while the afternoon council session was still meant to be running. "It concluded early," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Did it?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "It concluded when I said it did." She had already heard from Pell that the king had ended 2 sessions early in the past week without explanation. The council had noticed. That was going to matter later. What she couldn't sort into a category and leave for later was what the bond was doing. Not just awareness, something more insistent. A pressure that built when he stayed past a certain point and eased only slightly when he left. Her wolf had opinions about the distance between them that she was actively not acting on. She recapped the charcoal she had already put down. Bastian's jaw tightened for half a second. He had felt the same thing. She was certain of it. He knew she'd felt his reaction to it. Neither of them said anything. He left when the light changed, and she stayed in the garden until it was properly dark. The archive authorization arrived the following morning. Pell brought it with breakfast, a formal document bearing the king's seal, granting Vesa unrestricted access to the civil and historical records in the palace archive. The clerk who delivered it had the careful expression of someone doing something unprecedented and choosing not to have an opinion about it. Vesa went to the archive that afternoon. It was arranged chronologically by territory and then by category: household records, tribute logs, medical registries, correspondence between the palace and the outlying pacts. She started with tribute logs, 20 years of them. Agnes's name appeared in every single one. Not as a petitioner. As a registered independent practitioner, a traveling herbalist documented as present in the capital during each tribute period. Pack designation: unaffiliated, no dependents listed, no household. The same entry, year after year, written in different hands by different clerks who had no reason to look twice at it. Agnes had ensured there was no document connecting her to a daughter. No court-facing record tied Vesa to her household, her bloodline, or any claim that might have mattered to the palace. If her name existed anywhere beyond Fernholt itself, it would have been in the barest territorial form. No maternal reference, no pack history, nothing that led back to Agnes. On any record a court official might actually consult for lineage or succession, she was effectively absent. Not hidden by omission, hidden by design. Vesa moved through the medical registry and into the correspondence files. The search required more precision, but she had time and she was thorough. She found it in the record of unsolicited petitions, a log maintained by the receiving clerks of anyone who arrived at the palace outside the formal tribute periods and requested an audience. 5 weeks ago, Agnes Voss of Fernholt, traveling herbalist, requesting direct audience with the king. Purpose of visit: personal matter of urgency involving information relevant to the king's interests. Disposition: audience denied. Referred to Lord Crispin, senior counsel. Nothing after that. Vesa read the entry twice. Agnes had come to tell the king she existed. Crispin had intercepted the request and taken the meeting himself. Agnes had returned to Fernholt and been dead within 3 weeks. She folded that information somewhere cold and careful inside herself and kept reading. There was nothing else in the file connecting Crispin to Agnes. One meeting, logged by a clerk who had no reason to think it was anything except Routine redirection. No follow-up. No record of what was discussed or what had been decided. But the seal on the document she'd found in the hidden compartment of Agnes's trunk, the letter that had arrived 8 months ago asking whether Agnes intended to keep withholding information indefinitely, matched the secondary seal Crispin used on his council correspondence. She had seen it on a letter through an open door during a session she had no business watching, and she had looked long enough to be certain. She had a seal that matched and a meeting logged by a neutral clerk. That was not enough. A council lord receiving a petitioner was his function. She needed to know what Agnes had told him, what he had done with it, and what the weeks between that meeting and Agnes's death actually contained. She had none of that yet. She stacked the files back as she'd found them. The clerk at the entrance desk looked up when she passed. She gave him a brief nod and walked out. Crispin was at the end of the corridor, not moving toward her. Standing near a window, speaking to a younger man whose posture was attentive in the way of someone receiving direction. He didn't look up as she passed, but she was close enough to see his hands, and his hands had stopped moving the moment she stepped into the corridor. He knew she'd been in the archive. She kept her pace even and did not look back. That evening, she sat at the writing table in her room with the candle burning low. She had the journal, Agnes's letters, and everything she'd read in the archive arranged in her memory. She didn't write anything down. Not here, not in a room she couldn't fully account for. She thought about the clerk and whether he reported to Crispin directly. She thought about how many people in this palace had two sets of loyalties and how long it would take her to map which was which. She needed more before she could bring any of this to Bastian. Not suspicion, something that held its shape under examination. A council lord who had received a petitioner and whose seal appeared on a letter sent to that petitioner 8 months earlier could be explained a dozen ways. She had to be able to answer every one of those explanations before she opened her mouth. She was thinking through the problem when a sound came from the corridor. Not alarming, just footsteps passing and then stopping. The brief quiet of someone pausing outside a door. Then the footsteps continued. Bastian's rooms were on the floor above. She knew his patterns well enough now to recognize that he didn't sleep early. She knew from the particular quality of alertness her wolf settled into at this hour that he was awake somewhere in the tower above her, and that whatever he was doing, part of his attention was oriented in her direction. She did not find that comforting exactly, but it was something. She blew out the candle and lay in the dark with 3 weeks of her mother's life running through her head and waited for morning. The summons to the council chamber arrived before breakfast. Not for Vesa. She learned of it the way she'd learned most things in the past 2 weeks, through the particular quality of movement in the palace corridors, the way servants walked faster than usual and stopped talking when a door opened. Pell came up with a tray and set it down without meeting her eyes. "What's happened?" Vesa said. "Nothing that's been announced, my lady." "Pell?" The woman pressed her lips together. "The king left for the eastern border yesterday evening. An urgent dispute between 2 pact territories. He took Hadwin and a small escort." A pause. "Lord Crispin called a council session this morning." Vesa set down the bread she'd picked up. "How early?" "Before the first bell. A session called before dawn, while the king was 2 days' ride away, on a matter that had apparently been urgent enough to wait until he was gone to raise." She looked at the tray and decided she wasn't hungry. "If anyone comes to the door," she said, "you don't know where I am." Pell nodded once, with the expression of someone who had already worked out how this morning was going to go. She went to the archive first, not because she expected to find anything new. She had been through those files with considerable care and knew what was there. She went because she needed to see the document one more time with the specific question now in her mind. The clerk on duty was different from yesterday's, younger, who looked surprised to see her at this hour, and then produced the access authorization quickly enough that she suspected the standing order had come with instructions to be cooperative. She pulled the pack registry for the current year. The entry that should have established her eligibility as an independent Omega in Fernholt's territory was present. Sparse, administrative, and almost aggressively unhelpful. A territorial eligibility entry transferred from Fernholt 3 years earlier when she came of age, with no household attached, no maternal line recorded, and no pack affiliation beyond the minimum required for census purposes. It was exactly the kind of record Agnes would have allowed, because it revealed nothing that mattered. She had confirmed the entry on her first visit. What she had not done on that visit was compare the ink. She held the page close to the lamp. The registry used a standard black iron ink. The entry for her name was black iron, but the notation in the margin, the small annotation marking her registration as unverified, pending confirmation of pack standing, was in a slightly different shade. Not obviously, not to a casual eye. To someone who had spent 20 years noticing the precise weight of a line because a line too heavy changed a drawing's entire quality, the difference was visible. The annotation had been added after, not by the clerk who made the original entry. She memorized every detail of the margin notation, the letter forms, the angle of the strokes, the particular way the second writer formed their lowercase letters, and replaced the file. She was back in her room when the knock came. 2 guards. Behind them, Hadwin, who looked like a man standing in front of something he did not want to be standing in front of. Lady Vessa. His voice was flat, controlled. The council has reviewed your registration documents and identified a procedural irregularity. Pending verification of your pack standing, your presence in the palace is considered unauthorized. You'll need to leave the grounds while the matter is reviewed. She looked past him at the guards, then back at him. Where is the king? At the eastern border. Does he know about this? Something shifted in Hadwin's expression. A messenger has been dispatched. She understood what that meant. He had sent word. Whether that word arrived was not in his hands, and they both knew it. Hadwin was one man against a full council with a sealed document, and he was calculating that Bastian would return before she got far enough to matter. She kept her voice level. I want to see the document. He hesitated. I have the right to see any document used against me, she said. That is pack law. He produced it. She took her time. The council seal at the top was genuine. She could feel the impression of it in the paper, and it matched the wax seal she'd seen on official correspondence. The content declared her registration unverifiable on the grounds of undocumented pack standing, citing a marginal annotation in the registry as evidence that her original entry had been flagged at time of processing. The annotation she had just looked at 10 minutes ago. She moved to the signature at the bottom of the document, the registrar's signature, which should have been dated to when the original entry was made. It was dated 6 days ago. A registration flag from the original entry would have been dated to when the entry was made, years ago, when she had never interacted with the capital at all. This signature was dated 6 days ago. Either the registrar had made a procedural error, or the document had been generated specifically for this moment. She looked up at Hadwin. He was watching her face carefully. She handed the document back. I'd like 1 hour to pack my things. You have it. She went back into the room. Pell was standing near the wardrobe, still as furniture. Pack everything, Vessa said quietly. The important things first. If something has to be left, leave the dress. She walked out of the palace with her bag, and the cold of a northern morning on her face, and a document's worth of evidence folded into her memory with the precision she had spent 20 years developing for composition lines and proportion. The escort was 4 guards, and a man she didn't know who rode at the front and didn't speak to her. They took the north road toward the territory border, not the road that went to Fernholt, the road that went to the border city of Keswick, which was the nearest settlement outside the capital's immediate territory, and therefore the nearest place the council could direct her without it being an outright exile. She didn't ask for explanation. She spent the first hours of the ride thinking. The annotation's letter forms had been specific. She went through them again. The way the writer formed a double T, the angle of descent on a lowercase g. She would recognize that hand again if she saw it. The tree line came and went. The road wound through the northern forest, and the escort rode with the efficiency of people who wanted this errand finished. She counted the day's hours by the light and thought about what Bastian would find when he returned to an empty set of East Wing rooms. At the border crossing, 2 days' ride south, Bastian's delegation concluded the first session of mediation and was meant to hold the second the following morning. He was standing outside the meeting tent reviewing the proposed boundary adjustment with one of his border officers when it hit. Not slow, not a building feeling. A sudden withdrawal of something that had been constant enough that he'd stopped noticing it. The way a man stops noticing a sound that runs beneath everything until it stops. The absence registered as pain, specific, not diffuse, centered in his chest and extending outward through his arms with a force that made him stop moving mid-sentence. The officer said something. He didn't process it. His wolf came forward in a rush that he hadn't felt since he was young and had less control over it. The animal part of him, the part that knew the difference between distance and absence, rising up in a way that threatened the edges of the form he was maintaining. His hands on the parchment felt wrong. His skin felt wrong. There was something fundamentally incorrect about the space around him, and his wolf had immediate and insistent opinions about correcting it. He had not felt the bond snap into awareness with this kind of violence since the first moment he'd recognized it standing in the tribute hall. She was not in the palace. He didn't know how he knew the difference between her being across a building and her being across a territory. He simply knew. The bond told him the way his wolf told him which direction north was, not through reasoning, just as a fact about the world that his body held as absolute. "Call the second session for tomorrow," he said. His voice came out even. He was grateful for that. "My king, the dispute is documented. Both parties know the terms under discussion. They can wait one more day." He was already moving toward his tent. "I want the fastest rider we have ready in 10 minutes. Inside the tent, he stood for a moment with his hands flat on the camp table. A full shift was not going to be useful. He was 2 days from the capital. There were people on all sides who would interpret a shift in the context of a territorial dispute in exactly the wrong direction. And losing his form right now would cost him an authority he needed intact when he got back. He breathed through it. The wolf didn't settle, but it accepted the reasoning. Hadwin's messenger never arrived. He established that from his own rider, who had passed the northern road at speed and seen no one. Either the messenger had taken an alternate route and they'd crossed paths, or the message had never reached the road at all. He took his escort and rode through the night. The capital looked exactly as it always looked when he arrived in the gray hours before dawn. The outer walls, the gate guards, the familiar geometry of towers against the early sky. He rode through the gates and went directly to Hadwin. Hadwin's account was brief and factual. He had done what he could do. He said it without apology, because there was no apology that would change the sequence of events, and Hadwin understood this about him. What Hadwin also said, carefully at the end, was that Vesa had asked to see the document before she left, had examined it for several minutes, had handed it back without a word. Bastian looked at him. "She saw something." "I believe so." "Where is Crispin?" "In his rooms, this hour." "Leave him." He turned toward the stable. "Which road did they take?" "North, toward Keswick." "How long?" 2 days ahead of you." He didn't take the full escort. He took 2 men who could ride without rest and knew when to stay behind him. And he took the northern road in the kind of focused silence that his riders recognized as a situation where conversation was not welcome. The road to Keswick and back was 4 days in ordinary circumstances. He intended to cut a full day out of it, and his wolf gave him no choice about trying. Keswick was a border town that had been serving travelers long enough to have perfected the art of minding its own business. The inn near the eastern gate was the kind of establishment that asked few questions and provided serviceable rooms, which was likely why the escort had housed her there rather than in any official accommodation. He found her in the common room. She was sitting near the window with her bag at her feet and a cup of something she wasn't drinking in front of her. She looked up when he came through the door, and the expression that crossed her face in the first instant was not what he expected. Not relief. Something more guarded, with a question in it. He crossed to the table and sat down across from her. His riders stationed themselves at the door with the tact that good men developed after years of service. "You left without fighting it," he said. "I didn't have the ground to fight from yet." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I do now." She told him what she'd found. Not in the order of feeling. in the order of evidence. The annotation added after the original entry. The date on the registrar's signature that placed it 6 days ago instead of years back. The letter forms she had memorized. She laid it out with the methodical clarity of someone who had spent the journey arranging it into the most defensible sequence. He listened without interrupting. "The registrar's signature," he said when she finished. "You memorized the handwriting. I can describe every letter form." He looked at her steadily. "Do you know what you're saying?" "I'm saying the document used to remove me was created recently." "Yes." She met his eyes. "I know what that means. I'm not going to say it out loud in an in-common room." He almost wanted to smile. He contained it. "We'll return tomorrow." He stood. "Tonight, you should sleep. I slept on the road. That doesn't count." She looked up at him with an expression that suggested she was deciding whether to argue with that. She didn't. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "My mother came to the palace 5 weeks ago. I found it in the archive petition log. She requested an audience with you. The request was redirected." She paused. "The same seal that's on the document used today was on correspondence Agnes received 8 months ago. I'm not guessing at a connection. I'm telling you one exists." The room was very quiet. Bastian sat back down. The inn's fire crackled. Outside, Keswick continued its evening without awareness or interest. Vesa kept her hands around the cup and her eyes on him with the particular steadiness of someone who had said the hard thing and was now waiting to see what it built or broke. He did not, in that moment, have anything immediately useful to say. What he had was the specific cold clarity that came when a pattern resolved, when things that had appeared separate turned out to have a single source. "I'll need the petition log pulled when we return," he said. "I already know which shelf." He looked at her. She shrugged fractionally. "I memorized the archive layout on the first visit." This time he didn't contain the corner of it. He stood, and she stood with him, and he held the door as they walked out into the Keswick evening, her bag over her shoulder, his riders falling in without being signaled, the northern road ahead of them lit by a sky going from gray to black. His wolf had been quiet since the moment he walked through the inn door. Not settled, but present in the way of something that had found what it was looking for. He had time to think about what that meant. He chose to think about it later. They left Keswick before the light was full. The northern road back to the capital ran through open country for the first hour before it entered the forest belt, and Bastian rode without speaking for most of that first stretch. His riders stayed at a distance that gave the impression of privacy without sacrificing proximity. Vesa rode beside him on a horse the inn had provided, her bag secured behind the saddle, and used the silence to think through the sequence again from the start. She was still thinking when he spoke. "Tell me about the seal." "Not the council seal," she said. "The secondary one. Crispin uses it on correspondence that moves through his office specifically. Not official council documents, but administrative communications. Letters to registrars, instructions to clerks. I noticed it on a letter through an open door during a session I had no business watching." She paused. "It's a specific impression. The border press is slightly irregular on the left side. I'd recognize it anywhere." "The letter Agnes received 8 months ago." "Yes, and the annotation added to my registry entry, both from the same press." Bastian was quiet for a moment. "The registrar who made that entry answers to the administrative council, which Crispin chairs." "I know. So when we return and pull that registry, the annotation will trace back to a clerk in Crispin's direct chain," she finished. "Yes, I've run through it. The only explanation that doesn't end there is that someone used Crispin's seal without his knowledge, which requires access he controls personally." She looked straight ahead. "I don't think that's what happened." He didn't say anything. "I want to know something," she said. He turned his head toward her. "You were gone 2 days. 1 day of travel, 1 day of sessions. Hadwin is your beta. He has served you for what, 15 years? 16. And in 16 years of service, in a situation where he clearly disagreed with what he was being required to do, his first action was to send a messenger." She held her voice even. "A messenger that didn't arrive. And while you were unreachable and the messenger was gone, a council lord presented a document and your beta executed it. She waited. I am not saying Hadwin did wrong. I am saying that this court has a structure in which your absence creates a window, and that window was used. That concerns me more than Crispin specifically. Bastian's jaw tightened. It should concern you too, she said. It does. His voice was measured, but something underneath it wasn't. It has for a long time. I haven't resolved it. Why not? A pause. Longer than she expected from him. Because the council holds power that was given to it before I took the throne, he said. And taking it back creates a different problem. A king who can't be checked is a king who can do what Crispin just did in my name instead of against me. He looked at her. I've been choosing between two bad options for 6 years. She hadn't expected that. The honesty of it, not the fact itself. That's not an unsolvable problem, she said. But it requires changing the structure, not just removing the person who used it. I'm aware. Then why? Because changing a structure requires a coalition, he said. And I have spent 6 years building one inside a council where half the members were appointed by my predecessor with interests that conflict with mine. He paused. I'm telling you this because you asked a real question and you deserve a real answer. I'm not asking for absolution. She turned that over. I don't have absolution to give, she said. I have a dead mother and 3 weeks of questions. He held her gaze for a moment. I know. They rode into the tree line, and the light changed to the filtered gray of forest morning. Bastian sent a rider ahead mid-morning with instructions for Hadwin to meet them on the road. Hadwin arrived at their camp before the second day's travel had properly ended. He had ridden hard and arrived with the controlled urgency of a man who understood the summons had a specific shape. He dismounted, handed his horse off, and came to where they stood near the fire without ceremony. The petition log, Bastian said. 5 weeks ago, Agnes Voss. Hadwin was still for a moment. Then, I remembered her when the Lady Vessa arrived. The resemblance. He looked at Vessa. Your mother came to the palace on a non-ceremony day. She hadn't registered the visit in advance, which made the receiving clerks redirect her. Standard procedure when there's no prior appointment for the king. Who redirected her, Vessa said. The receiving clerk on duty would have first sent word to my office, Hadwin said. I was in a border briefing. The message reached Crispin's desk before mine because his office sits between the gate reception and the council wing. A pause. He took the meeting himself. I was told afterward, a traveling herbalist with a personal petition, received and dismissed, no further action needed. I had no reason to question it. Did you see her? Vessa said. Before she left. Briefly, in the outer corridor while she was waiting. She didn't tell me why she'd come. Hadwin looked at her carefully. She was well when she left. No distress I could identify. She died 3 weeks after that visit. Silence. Hadwin's expression changed in a way that was not surprise. It was the look of a man who had already begun running a sequence backward in his head and didn't like where it was arriving. The death was registered as a chest sickness, he said slowly. Agnes was barely past 50, Vessa said. She had been healthy all her life. She got sick the week after she returned from this palace, and she was dead in 3 weeks. No one said the word. It hung in the air without needing to be spoken. Bastian had not moved. His hands were at his sides and his wolf was close to the surface. Vessa could feel it the way she felt weather before it arrived, a pressure that preceded the event itself. He was controlling it, but it was close. Crispin knew why she came, Bastian said. His voice was quiet. He read the petition request, Hadwin said. The log would have had the stated purpose. Information relevant to the king's interests, Vessa said. That's what she wrote. He would have understood what that meant once she told him in the meeting. That she had a daughter, that the daughter was an omega of eligible age. She paused. That the daughter existed at all, which Agnes had been hiding from the capital for 22 years. Hadwin looked at Bastian. He understood what it meant for you specifically, Bastian said. Not to either of them, working through it aloud. A mate. An omega mate outside any pack structure, outside any political arrangement he'd had a hand in shaping. Agnes came here to give you a path to something that bypassed every piece of leverage he holds over succession. Vesa stared at the fire. Her mother had spent 20 years keeping her away from this city, from this court, from everything Agnes had clearly understood about what it would mean if Vesa arrived. And then, 5 weeks ago, she had decided that 20 years was enough and come here alone to fix it. Had sat in an outer corridor and waited for an audience. Had been redirected to the one person in this palace who had reason to ensure she never reached the king. And then had gone home and died. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose and breathed through her mouth. The fire was the only sound for a while. Agnes wrote in her journal that she was afraid, Vesa said eventually. The words were steady. That she'd been afraid since I was small. That the court would use me, or that I'd be destroyed by the politics of it, or that the bond, if it existed, would pull me into something I wasn't equipped to survive. She stopped, took a breath. She wasn't wrong to be afraid. She was wrong to think that keeping me away was protecting me, instead of just delaying it. Neither Bastian nor Hadwin spoke. She came here to tell you the truth, and she was killed for it. The flatness in her own voice surprised her, not absence of feeling. Something beyond it, a fury so structured it had stopped having room for expression. I need you to understand something. I'm going to need proof, not supposition, not a chain of logic that a council lord could explain away. I need a direct line from Crispin to what happened to her. She looked at Bastian. Can you get that? Yes, he said. How? The clerk who processed the petition log. The receiving staff who were present that day. The physician who signed Agnes's death record, and whether that physician has any connection to Crispin's office. He held her gaze. I have been king for 6 years. I know how to investigate a man I need to move against. Then we move against him properly. We do. Hadwin looked between them, and then made the quiet exit of a man who understood the conversation had completed the part that required his presence. His footsteps receded toward the horses. Vesa sat down on the camp log. The grief had a specific texture, not the broad, shapeless thing of the first weeks after Agnes died. The disorientation of returning to an empty cottage, the habitual turning toward a chair that held no one. This was sharper, directed. She was grieving something she could now see clearly. Her mother at 50 years old, sitting in an outer corridor with everything she'd withheld for 2 decades, finally ready to be handed over, redirected by a stranger who smiled, taken to a private room, and sent home with whatever version of dismissal Crispin had delivered. Agnes had not told her in the journal that she was afraid of what she'd find in that meeting. The last entry had been determined, resolute. She had not come back, afraid. Whatever had happened in that room, Agnes had come out of it and gone home and said nothing, had simply gotten sick. Vesa pressed her palm flat on her knee. She drew you, she said. It came out without planning. When I was small, she used to tell me about a boy from a market on the North Road who had been kind. She never said who he was. I think she knew, or suspected, for a long time. Before I ever found the drawing. A pause. She was protecting me from something she loved about me. I don't know how to hold both of those things. Bastian sat down beside her. Not close. Close enough. You don't have to hold them at once, he said. I know. She looked at the fire. I just need to understand her. The whole shape of it. Not the version where she was wrong and paid for it. The version where she did what she thought was right for 20 years and then changed her mind and paid for that instead. He was quiet beside her. The campfire burned low. Above the tree line, the sky had gone fully dark and the first stars appeared. The same stars that appeared from any field or cottage window in the territory. Her wolf was settled in a way it hadn't been since before she left Fernholt. Present, attentive, oriented. She was aware of Bastian with a specificity that the evening and the proximity had not created. It had been there since the tribute hall. It had been there, if she was honest, somewhere on the edges of everything she'd felt since she was 5 years old, and a boy crouched down beside her on a market street. She sat with that for a while. In the morning, the camp was breaking before full light, riders packing and horses being readied. the ordinary industry of men who had been told there was a return schedule to keep. Vesa stood at the edge of the camp where the trees began. She heard him behind her before he spoke. She always heard him, or felt him, or whatever the correct word was for the awareness that preceded his arrival, and didn't depart when he left. Her wolf tracked him at all distances with a consistency she had stopped trying to categorize. "I need to say something," she said. He stopped a few feet behind her and waited. "The bond." She kept her eyes on the tree line. "I've been treating it as information. Something to observe and account for without acting on it, because acting on it felt like surrendering a choice I hadn't finished making." She turned. He was looking at her with full attention, no performance in it. "I've made the choice." Something shifted in his expression. "I'm not doing this because of grief," she said, "or because of what we found out about Agnes. I'm telling you that specifically so there's no version of this that becomes about that later. This is a separate decision." "I know," he said. "I've watched you make decisions for 2 weeks. I know what it looks like." His wolf was present in a way that she felt as much as sensed. The bond pulling taut between them with the insistence of something that had been patient for far longer than 2 weeks. She stepped toward him and closed the remaining distance, and his hands came up to her face with the carefulness of someone handling the thing they least wanted to drop. She pressed her lips to the side of his throat. His breathing stopped. She bit down. The bond didn't ignite so much as complete, like a weight settling, like a sound resolving into the note it had been building toward. She felt his wolf, enormous and present, and directed entirely at her with a force that should have been frightening and was instead the most certain thing she had ever felt. His arms came around her before he'd made the conscious decision to move. He marked her in return. She felt it as a heat that ran from her throat to the center of her chest and stayed. They stood in the space between the camp and the trees while the morning built itself around them, her face against his jaw, his hands steady at her back, and neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say. The bond had said it already, in the only language it knew, not words, but the absolute animal fact of two people who had been turned in the same direction for 18 years, finally seeing what they'd both been looking at. Behind them, at the camp, a rider cleared his throat pointedly, and then immediately became very occupied with a saddle strap. Vesa pulled back enough to look at him. "We have a council lord to dismantle," she said. "We do. And a clerk whose handwriting I can identify." "Yes." She stepped back and turned toward the camp. He walked beside her, and the bond was quiet in the way of something that had stopped needing to announce itself, because it was no longer in question. The road back to the capital was the same road they had taken out of it. The trees were the same trees, the light the same gray gold of early autumn. But the quality of the space between them had changed in a way that the riders noticed and professionally declined to comment on. Hadwin, riding at a respectful distance, allowed himself exactly one glance. He said nothing. He had served Bastion for 16 years, and he knew when something had been resolved. He faced forward and kept his pace and thought about the work waiting at the capital. The petition logs, the registry records, the clerk whose handwriting matched a seal used against a woman who'd come to that palace to tell the truth. There was a great deal to do. They arrived at the capital gates in the late afternoon of the third day. The gate guards saw the king's banner first and had the entrance open before the horses reached the outer road. Word moved ahead of them through the palace. It always did, a current of awareness preceding arrival. And by the time Bastion dismounted in the inner courtyard, Hadwin was already there with 2 clerks behind him carrying document cases. "The registry," Hadwin said. "Yes, and the petition log. And the physician who signed Agnes Voss's death record." Bastion handed off his horse without looking away from him. "I want the clerk who made the annotation in front of me before the council session." "When do you want the session?" "Tomorrow morning. Give Crispin tonight." Hadwin moved without further word. Vesa dismounted and stood in the courtyard with her bag and the particular stillness of someone arriving to a place that was not yet fully hers, calculating the ground beneath her feet. Pell appeared at the eastern entrance with the expression of a woman who had spent 3 days managing questions she wasn't authorized to answer, and was relieved to have a different problem. "Your rooms are ready, my lady." Undisturbed. "Thank you, Pell." She spent the evening at the writing table with a candle and the journal in front of her. Not reading, she had read it enough times to carry it complete. She sat with it closed under her hands and thought through tomorrow with the methodical attention she usually gave to composition. What evidence existed? What form it needed to take in a council session? Where Crispin would push back, and how? She had not been inside a formal council session. She knew the structure from the archive records, and structure was something she was good at reading. At some point, she became aware that Bastian was awake in the tower above. She had been aware of it every night since she arrived. The bond was constant now, not disruptive, present the way her own heartbeat was present, something she noticed only when she directed attention toward it. She went to bed when the candle burned down and slept without difficulty. The clerk's name was Perrin, and he arrived at Bastian's study before the first bell with the expression of a man who had not slept. Vesa was already there when Hadwin brought him in. She stood to the side while Bastian sat at the table, and she watched Perrin's eyes find her and then move away quickly. He knew who she was. He had presumably known since the moment he added the annotation. Bastian placed the registry page on the table with the annotation facing up. "Explain this entry," he said. Perrin looked at it. "It's a procedural flag, my king. Unverified pack standing at time of—" "The date," Bastian said. Silence. "The original entry is 3 years old. The annotation is dated 6 days ago." Bastian did not raise his voice. "Explain that." Perrin's hands folded together in front of him. He was young, younger than Vesa had expected, and the calculation moving through his face was the calculation of someone trying to find a version of events that protected him without requiring further self-implication. "I was instructed," he said finally, "to add the notation as a procedural correction." "By whom?" The young man looked at the table. "By whom?" Bastian said again, and the quality of his voice on the second asking carried something underneath it that had nothing to do with volume. Her wolf registered it as a low vibration, the alpha beneath the king asserting something wordless and absolute. Perrin told them. The council session convened at mid-morning. 12 men around a long table, Crispin at the left of the king's seat, with the composed bearing of someone who had prepared for this and intended to hold his position. His eyes moved to Vesa when she entered behind Bastian and settled on her with no visible reaction. She had expected something: satisfaction, apprehension, the particular blankness of someone suppressing a response. What she found instead was a careful neutrality that told her he had decided to contest this fully. Bastian sat. He let the session settle into its formal weight, the way she had seen him use silence in other rooms. The council adjusted itself into it, some visibly uncomfortable, some watchful, one man at the far end who looked at Vesa and then at Crispin and then at the table. "Lord Crispin," Bastian said, "you called a council session 2 days ago and removed a guest from the palace in my absence. Present your evidence." Crispin opened the document case in front of him. "The registry annotation has been addressed." Bastian's voice didn't change. "The clerk who made the annotation is in Hadwin's custody and has given a complete account of the instruction chain. Try the next one." A pause, brief but real. "The original entry was legitimate at time of filing. I've reviewed it." He looked at Crispin steadily. "The document you presented to this council was generated 6 days ago. The basis for expulsion did not exist until you created it. That is not a procedural question. That is fraud against the crown." The room went very still. Crispin set his hands flat on the table. "My king, I acted in the interests of this council and the integrity of— You acted to remove someone from this palace before I returned." Bastian's voice was even, which requires an explanation of why her presence concerned you specifically. Vesa stepped forward. She had not planned specific phrasing. She had planned what she would prove, which was different. She placed 3 documents on the table in front of the nearest council member, who looked at them, and passed them along without comment. "The petition log from 5 weeks ago," she said. "Agnes Voss of Fernholt, requesting audience with the king, redirected to Lord Crispin. The stated purpose is in the clerk's record." She waited while the documents moved. The correspondence Agnes received 8 months before that visit. The seal on that letter matches Lord Crispin's secondary administrative press. The impression is irregular on the left border. You can compare it to any document in this room that carries that seal. She placed one more item on the table. Agnes Voss died 3 weeks after her meeting here. She was 52 years old and in good health. The physician who signed her death record trained under a practitioner whose appointment was recommended in writing by Lord Crispin 11 years ago. Silence. "I'm not presenting proof of the specific act," she said. "I'm presenting a pattern that this council should require Lord Crispin to explain. A woman came to this palace to speak to the king. Lord Crispin intercepted her. She died 3 weeks later. The same lord then used a fabricated document to remove that woman's daughter from the palace the moment the king was absent." She looked at Crispin directly. "I would like to hear the explanation." Crispin held her gaze. "You're an Omega from a border village," he said. "With a drawing and a story. You have constructed a sequence from coincidence and a clerk who will say whatever protects himself. The clerk named you before being told what evidence existed," Hadwin said from the doorway. Crispin looked at Bastian. "My king, this woman has no standing in this council. Her presence here is without precedent." "She has my standing," Bastian said. "That is sufficient." Something moved through the room at that. Not surprise. These men had watched the past weeks with the close attention of people who maintained position by tracking shifts of power correctly. Several had already assembled a working interpretation. The statement removed that interpretation and replaced it with a fact. Lord Crispin. The register of Bastian's voice shifted, still controlled, but carrying the full weight of what he was. Her wolf felt it as a pressure at the base of her spine. Around the table, every man with shifting blood in him adjusted his posture without meaning to. "You will answer this council's questions regarding the petition, the correspondence, and the physician. This session does not conclude until those questions are addressed." The session lasted 4 hours. Vesa sat through all of it. She answered questions from 3 council members who directed them to her with varying degrees of hostility. She answered each with the specific evidence she had. She did not speculate beyond what she could support. When a lord from the Northern Territory asked, point blank, what her connection to the king was, she said, "That is a separate matter and not relevant to the evidence before this council." Bastian glanced at her from across the table. She didn't look at him. Crispin's account unraveled in the specific way fabricated accounts unravel when placed beside physical evidence and asked to be consistent. By the 3rd hour, he had stopped trying to explain the physician and was arguing the standard of proof required to act on circumstantial connection. By the 4th hour, he had gone quiet in a way that was not dignity, but exhaustion. The council voted on censure, 9-3. Bastian announced the formal charge at the conclusion. Fraud against the crown, pending further investigation into the death of Agnes Voss. Crispin was removed from his council seat, his secondary seal confiscated, his movement restricted to the palace grounds pending the investigation's conclusion. He left the chamber without looking at Vesa. She watched him go and felt nothing that surprised her. Not satisfaction, not the specific release she had anticipated. Something quieter, the recognition that the process was running correctly. Agnes would have approved of a correctly running process over any other form of resolution. 3 days later, Bastian convened a separate gathering, not the full council. The alphas who held territories under the crown, 12 of them, arrived over 2 days from varying distances. The great hall was arranged for a formal reception without the ceremony trappings of the tribute. No presentation lines, no gift tables. Vesa stood at the front of the hall when they arrived. She had dressed deliberately, not in silk she didn't own, but in the best of what she had, clean and considered. She had charcoal on 2 fingers from the morning's work and had not removed it. Bastian waited until all 12 were present. Then he stood and spoke for less time than she expected. He described the bond, not its personal dimensions, but its nature. A mate bond that had begun in childhood, evidenced by 2 drawings made independently by 2 children who had never compared their work, which when placed side by side showed a shared direction of looking. He described the petition. He described what had been done to Agnes. He described the investigation's current state. Then he placed both drawings on the table. "This is not a political arrangement," he said. "I'm not presenting this council with an alliance or a negotiation. I'm presenting a fact. The bond exists. It preceded any of our awareness of it. The evidence is on this table." He looked along the row of faces. "I am informing you as a matter of record." The silence that followed had different textures in different parts of the room. Some of the alphas looked at the drawings with genuine attention. 2 exchanged a look she couldn't fully read. The Northern Lord, the one who had asked her a direct question after the censure vote, studied both papers for a long moment, then looked at Vesa. "The evidence you presented in council," he said. "Well constructed." "Thank you. You have access to the archive." "I do." He nodded, filing it, and moved on. The Southern Lord raised the question of succession. He phrased it as procedural, about pack law and bloodline capacity for heirs. His eyes were on Bastian when he asked it, but the question was aimed at her. Vesa answered before Bastian could. "Pack law on succession requires an heir capable of holding the king's territory," she said. "It does not specify the bloodline configuration required to produce one. What it requires is demonstrated capacity." She held the Lord's gaze. "That question is premature. When it becomes relevant, I'll answer it with evidence, not projection." The Southern Lord studied her. "You've read the succession law," he said. "I've read the archive." He sat back. The gathering concluded without formal opposition. Not unanimous acceptance. She was not naive enough to interpret the absence of stated objection as the presence of genuine support. 3 of the 12 would watch and wait. 2 would be a problem when they found the right leverage point. She had already identified this and intended to track it. But the 12 had heard the statement, seen the drawings, and left without challenge. The ground had shifted. What happened next depended on what was built on it. The investigation concluded in the 8th week, and the formal proceedings ran for 3 weeks after that. The physician came apart faster than Crispin had. He was younger, and fear finds different purchase in younger men. The substance used had been specific, the kind that left no trace without knowing precisely what to look for. The connection to Crispin was documented through correspondence, through a purchasing chain, through 2 transactions in the physician's ledger that had no other explanation. The proceedings were public, formal, and long. Vesa attended every session. She sat in the observer's gallery with Hadwin to her right and a blank sheet of paper on her knee, and she drew. Not Crispin. The room itself. The vaulted ceiling, the light through the high windows, the way the oak table's grain ran across its full length. Her hands needed occupation. She had learned 20 years ago that drawing helped her think, and that thinking clearly was the most useful thing she could offer in any room. She filled 4 pages by the end of it. On the last day, when the sentence was read, she set the charcoal down. Removal from all standing, confiscation of lands held under the crown's grant, exile to the outer territories with no right of return. The sentence was fair, not satisfying in the way that nothing could be satisfying when the central wrong could not be undone. Fair. Agnes had not come here seeking vengeance. She had come seeking honesty. A clear path between a truth and the person who needed to hear it. Crispin had closed that path and paid the price the law assigned to it. That was what Vesa could give her now. The rest, the cottage in Fernholt, the empty chair, the 20 years of protection that had been both shield and deprivation, she carried differently, not lighter with time, but more accurately. She understood the shape of it now. Agnes had been afraid of the exact world Vesa was standing in the middle of, and she had not been wrong to fear it, and she had also eventually decided that Vesa deserved to be inside it, making her own calculations. Both things had been true. The East Wing rooms had changed gradually enough that Vesa hadn't noticed the accumulation until Pell mentioned it one morning with the careful tone of someone raising something they found either charming or alarming, and had not decided which. The drawings were on the walls, not hung formally, pressed into gaps in the stone, tucked behind sconces, resting on shelves where they had been set temporarily, and then left because they fit. The archive's corridors had 3. The garden wall had a detailed study of the north-facing roses that a groundskeeper had apparently decided to preserve by moving a climbing vine in front of it, which Vesa had taken as the highest compliment she'd received since arriving. Bastian had said nothing about any of it. When she found one pinned inside the study door, a quick sketch made of him from across the room while he worked, never intended to be kept, she had looked at him, and he had looked back with an expression that closed the subject entirely. She kept drawing. The fair came to the capital in the late autumn, as it came every year. Merchants from a dozen territories, livestock, craftwork, food stalls running the length of the outer market road. The palace opened its gates, which meant the outer courtyard filled with noise and movement and the particular chaos of 1,000 people with different purposes occupying the same ground. Vesa walked through it with no particular destination. She had come for paper. A merchant from the Eastern Territory whose supplier produced a weight and texture she hadn't found anywhere else, and she had been rationing her remaining sheets for 2 months. She found him near the middle row, made the purchase, and was turning back toward the inner gate when she heard it. A child crying in a way that required no interpretation. Not injury, not hunger. The specific sound of a child who had looked up and found an unfamiliar horizon in every direction. She stopped. The girl was perhaps 5 years old, standing near a fabric stall with both hands fisted at her sides, turning in short, uncertain arcs. The people moving around her were not unkind. They simply had their own purposes, and the girl had not yet made enough noise to interrupt them. Vesa crossed to her and crouched down. The girl looked at her with eyes red at the edges and the expression of someone who had been trying very hard to be brave and was nearly out of it. "You're looking for someone," Vesa said. The girl nodded once, tightly. "Tell me what they look like and we'll find them together." The girl described her mother in the way children describe people they know too well to see clearly. The color of her headscarf, the basket she'd been carrying, the particular stall she had been looking at before the crowd shifted between them. Specific details. Children always notice the things adults considered incidental. Vesa took her hand. They moved through the fair methodically, not rushed, the way you moved when you needed to cover ground without losing the person beside you. The girl stopped crying. She was occupied now, pointing at landmarks, adjusting her description as they walked. The mother was near the grain merchant at the fair's far end, scanning faces with barely controlled urgency. The girl saw her first and pulled free of Vesa's hand and ran. Vesa stood where she was and watched. The mother caught the girl and held on, then looked up over her daughter's head with the open expression of someone whose fear had just resolved into relief and needed somewhere to put it. Vesa nodded once and turned back toward the inner gate. She was halfway there when she heard footsteps behind her, a rhythm she recognized without needing to locate it. The specific cadence of someone who walked with the same quality of intent, whether there was a crowd or not. She didn't turn around. Bastian came up beside her, falling into step, hands clasped behind his back. "You were watching," she said, "from the wall." She walked. He walked. The fair moved around them on both sides. "She was 5, Vesa said, standing exactly the way I was standing." "I know." She looked at him. He was watching the crowd ahead with the face he wore when he was managing what he felt about something and not quite managing it completely. She had learned to see the difference. She took his hand. He turned toward her, brief and full, and then turned back to the road ahead. They walked through the inner gate together, and the fair carried on behind them without pause, enormous and indifferent, the way the world carries on past the specific gravity of any one moment, forward into whatever ordinary day came next. Above the gate, mounted on a beam that had held nothing but weather for years, one of her drawings had been framed. She had tacked it there months ago as a temporary measure, and someone had found it and put oak around it and rehung it at a height where it caught the afternoon light. She had never asked who. That evening she sat at the writing table with 2 sheets of the new paper and drew both of them from memory. The girl in the market and the boy from 18 years ago. The same posture, the same fisted hands, the same direction of turning. She placed them side by side. Then she opened the second drawer of Bastian's table, where the original drawings lived, and added them to what was already there. 4 pieces of paper now, 2 from childhood, 2 from today.